The thing about great design is that when it works, you don't even notice it. It's invisible. Like flipping a light switch, you don't even think about your wiring or how power gets to your house. You just expect it to turn on. But when design misses the mark, when it's confusing or hard to use, people feel it. You felt it. And when it's really bad, that frustration is real. It's intense. And your business goals bear the brunt of that frustration. Unlike a light switch, design success isn't binary. There's a spectrum. Some issues are glaring, but others are more subtle. And even those small moments of friction are going to quietly erode your users' trust and engagement. And that's why thoughtful design isn't just about beauty. Creating great design requires real effort and expertise. Research, strategy, testing, iteration, psychology, business thinking. And yeah, it has to look good too. But if you're not deep in the design world, it's easy to see only that final product, that picture. But that visual layer is just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of that real work is happening beneath the surface. And if you don't understand the importance of that work, if you don't prioritize it, if you don't invest in it when you're building your site or application, it can leave you with a really weak foundation that limits your long-term success. So today we're pulling back the curtain. We're going to go beyond pretty to talk about the real work of UX and UI design, the thinking, the research, the strategic problem solving that happens before a single pixel hits the screen, and that should continue to iterate and evolve long after launch. I'm Michael Meyers, and this is Tag1 Team Talks, podcast by Tag1 Consulting. Hello and welcome to Tag1 Team Talks, the Tag1 Consulting podcast. I'm Michael Meyers, Managing Director at Tag1, and I'm joined today by Andrew Glassett and Pilar Belhumeur. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Michael.
Andrew's our product and UX design lead. He's been doing this for over 15 years, and he's worked with some really incredible brands, including Vimeo, Lego, and Walmart. And Pilar is our creative director, who's been doing this for over 25 years, working with the leaders in every industry. BBC, Procter & Gamble, IBM, MasterCard. These guys have amazing experience. I'm excited about today's episode. The work that goes on behind the scenes that goes beyond making your site look good is a really big part of what they do. But before we dive into the conversation, let me tell you a little bit about Tag1. Tag1's number 2 all-time contributor to Drupal, the world's second most popular CMS. For almost 20 years now, we've led the development of many of the amazing features and best practices that millions of websites and several 100,000 organizations depend on to run their businesses. We're the architects of the open web that your sites rely on. We apply that architectural expertise to many technologies. We're a full-service technology partner from discovery and design to identity and branding to building and scaling complex applications. We lead AI strategy and implementation, design and manage infrastructure, and do performance tuning across a wide range of platforms. Organizations like Google, Pfizer, Harvard, and the AFL-CIO trust us to solve their most mission-critical challenges. And what Andrew and Pilar do, that strategic design work we'll be talking about today, that's a foundational part of how we help our clients succeed. To learn more, you can reach out to us via our website or email us at info@tag1.com. That's TAG1.com. Let's get into it. Why do you think that people have this really common misconception that the job of UX and UI designers is just to make things look pretty?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it comes to do with maybe the history of a lot of designers. Me included, I started in graphic design and worked primarily on things like logos and colors and stuff that have classical design background to them, but are not really thinking deeper. I just thinking about some of my early projects, like designing a banner ad or something like that. I focus more on what a user is seeing. There's a little bit of getting into seeing what a business is wanting to do while you're making an ad, but really you're just focused more on that surface level of the design.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think there's maybe clients think about what they're seeing, as Andrew said, and they don't realize there's a lot of strategic thinking and thinking about the functionality and micro interactions of a product or a service. And that really goes beyond just knowing picking a stock photo or, slapping a headline on without any thought for the fonts or things like that. So it actually goes so much deeper, I think, especially product and service design.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
there's a lot.
go on, Andrew.
I was just saying there's a lot of processes that center around design thinking, and those are not often seen.
Yeah, I think people who work around designers, even they don't have a really clear picture of the actual process, right? I don't interact with you guys every day or day to day on projects. But before we dig into the process, just at a high level, could you guys walk us through what happens before you even, open a design tool?
I think you have to learn about the client. You have to learn about the problem that they're asking you to solve. You have to understand users and really dive into what their needs are. And I think, understanding that client, their problems, the business, and balancing that with kind of user needs, and having those two things top of mind when you are designing is critical to having a successful design. It's about solving problems and, creating solutions. It's not as much about just picking a picture and a color and that's it. It's like it contains all of that, but it's so much deeper.
Yeah, you got to clarify business goals at the very beginning. And I think as a designer gets further into their career, the more they move up the chain of a design process, and that's where you're understanding more what users need, and also like the constraints that you may have when you're trying to understand a problem.
So before you can solve the problem, you need to identify what the problem is. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I would say that there's a bunch of activities that you can do to understand the problem. One of them would be first, you usually start with a series of stakeholder interviews and understand their motivations and what goals that they have as you're starting a new project. And then there's other things like competitive analysis and also like reviewing some existing analytics.
Yeah, there's a lot of investigation and research I think that goes on at the beginning. And it's so important to talk to those stakeholders, as Andrew said, because you really need to understand their business and understand their pain points. And then looking around at best practices, doing, competitive analysis, looking at the competitors, what are they doing? Why is your client different? What can we learn from the competitors? And then also even a heuristic analysis, like looking at what they have today, from knowing all the best practices of, user experience, UX, UI, what can be done differently? What can improve? So there's a lot of techniques to really dig in and understand the issues.
So when you guys send out a survey or you're doing these interviews, like ultimately, what are you trying to discover or understand?
I think from the interviews, and all of the gathering of information, we try to understand their business problem, the business goals, as Andrew said, to make sure that we know where success is, what success looks like. But then also we're trying to help to define the requirements of the project, so that's crucial to creating the right design and building the right product or service.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way when you're talking to stakeholders because they're, hopefully the experts in this particular area. And that before you get into actually talking to potential customers or doing like traditional user research, you can figure out some of those pain points, and that can help you frame your conversations that you have with the actual customers or consumers of the site you're working on.
I was wondering about that because, there's the business stakeholders and their goals internally, but then there's also the users and their needs and pain points. So typically the talking to the end users is something that happens after you talk to a lot of the folks internally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's once you get these high level requirements, you need to learn more about the people you're actually designing for. And so doing stuff like user interviews or surveys help you investigate what people's motivations are and like what their biggest issues are as they're navigating a site or a product.
Yeah, I hear you saying things like user interviews, surveys, like not necessarily what I would first think of when I think of, UI, UX designer. Is this something that you guys are leading the charge on? Does it depend upon the project? Like who's putting, the questions together? Who's getting the information? Who's analyzing the results? Like how does this actually work?
Yeah, we do that. We actually are doing it right now for one of my on multiple projects. So we actually collect all of that information. It's super fascinating and actually interesting. Another thing that we could do is like usability testing or baseline usability testing to test how their product is doing now, see where the pain points are, understand what users need and what they're not finding. And so all of that information is taken back, just like with the stakeholder interviews that we do, and really synthesized into, this is what the product should be. This is where we're going to fix things. If there is an existing product, this is where your business goals are. Your users are not getting what they need, and here's how you can fix it. So I think that, yeah, we do all of those activities. So it's a combination of skills, I think. And it's like anthropology and and design. Like, so it's kind of, it's fascinating. It's much deeper than just, as Andrew said, like creating an ad or simpler things like that. It's a longer process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
and
can start to see. Oh, sorry. Go on, Andrew.
oh, I was just gonna say, like I've worked in several different contexts where we had a dedicated user researcher, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't involved in figuring out what we should research. It's like they were then tasked with doing the actual like interviewing of people. But I feel like UX UI people are always involved in every phase of the process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true. Yep.
I think it's part of what leads to some of these misconceptions, right? You guys are
Right.
involved in such a wide array of activities that you might not immediately associate with it, but that are core to, who you are and what you do for the project and the organizations.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. Like if there are, it's great if you have someone that is a, dedicated user researcher. You're also able to do smaller things too. Like if you don't have the budget to do something larger where you're hiring a user researcher and a vendor that's helping you, there are websites that you can test on your own and moderate your own tests and then collect the information that way. So it really depends on the scale of the project.
Yeah, we're going to talk about constraints a bunch throughout this conversation. I think there are some really big projects we do where you can have, dedicated people in these roles, but often, and for a lot of organizations, budgets are tight, resources are tight, and there is no one size fits all approach regardless. But, knowing that there are ways that you can adapt like that is key. Like, are there other ways that, you guys have to adapt, within that kind of a constraint or situation?
Yeah, I would say that I believe that it's always better to have some user research than none at all. So even if you're doing stuff like a hallway test where you're putting some just ideas down and even showing it to somebody you work with or something like that. Like I through my career, there's been a lot of times where I actually didn't have access to users, like it is for whatever reason, like I couldn't access them. So you have to rely on more expert opinions, and that's where you are you're turning back to stakeholders at that point, or people who are experts in the area to show them your ideas and get some feedback from them.
I know there's no
Yeah, that's
one size fits all. Oh, sorry. Go on, Flo.
nope. Go ahead. That's a great point. Is just getting feedback from the people around you. It's a great point. Yeah.
I know there's no one size fits all approach to projects. And I know that this is an iterative process, but assuming we're going through it from the beginning as we're talking it through, what comes next after you've talked to stakeholders and done some research? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I think that once you have as much research as you're able to get, it's like you're then put into this mode of ideating, exploring potential solutions to the problem. And you're doing brainstorming at that point, you're doing sketching, you're doing wireframing, and you're encouraging divergent thinking before narrowing down. So at that point, there's a series of activities, like say in like the Google Sprint methodology, where you come together, you look at the problem, you sketch out solutions together, you vote on those solutions. There's other activities where you go and do your own solution, come back together, vote on those solutions. And so that way you're getting like an idea of what the group is thinking that might be a good solution to the problem.
So it's
Yeah,
a
I think that's
collaborative process.
totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's where some of the best solutions come from, is because you're not in a silo. You're engaging with others, you're encouraging other ideas. And that's where I think some of the best ideas come from, is like when you're building on each other's energy and creative thinking and ideation.
I don't know if you guys would consider this a constraint, if that's the right terminology, or if this might be helpful. But I know that you have to follow things like brand guidelines. There's certain business rules that are going to influence what you do and how you approach this. Do you view these as constraints? Are these helpful? How does it factor into the process?
Okay. So many companies do have brand guidelines, and they're very thorough and they're smart, and they have amazing guardrails for us, because we need to understand the brand of the company, and we need to make sure we're reflecting that brand in the designs that we do. So many times they're great guardrails. I think if you have no guardrails for someone's brand, then it's like it can be all over the place. There's so many choices, but you want to kind of align with that business and make sure that you're expressing their brand properly in every design. And I think as well, sometimes people don't have as many brand guidelines, or they're kind of older and you have, someone on the team that wants to evolve it. And sometimes, we're able to integrate some newer things into those guidelines, or create, something a little bit more polished or a little bit better during our design process. So that's also a possibility. Sometimes we're extremely strict about following the brand guidelines, and sometimes the client's open to us, kind of exploring a little bit more, and slightly evolving some things. And that's really fun, actually.
Yes, it really depends on the client, like how open they are to those kind of newer ideas. And it's always fun when they are open to it, because then you're like creating something new with them. And I think the end result is always better in that situation.
Is there an order to these things? Like, are you always doing wireframes, followed by design? I know that there's no one size fits all approach. Is there an ideal, and how do you handle exceptions to that?
I think there is usually, it can be an order, and it depends on the client. Like Andrew and I are working on something now, and we actually know the client really well. Andrew has this incredible connection, and he just knows what to do. And so many times we actually skip over wireframes, but usually you do create wireframes to ensure that we're going in the right direction and things are kind of mapped out, before we go into kind of the details and the deeper design. But, it really depends on the client. It depends on the situation. So, yeah. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts? You
Yeah,
just,
it really depends on the
yeah.
client or the situation. Like in that, what you were just talking about is, we know this client now very well. And because of that, we can like skip over steps. Like clients are always going to like if you can be more efficient. So when we're able to do that, it, yeah, it's nice to be able to connect with them and be efficient as possible as you're creating an.
When we sat down and we first talked about doing this episode, you guys said something that really stuck with me. You called design a team sport. And we talked a little bit about, working collaboratively with clients. We're going to talk more about working collaboratively with the team. Another one of the many skills that you guys need to bring to the table is managing and coordinating all of these resources, including many cases on bigger projects, a team of designers, some of them who, might be more junior. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, your role as cat herders and taskmasters and how you, get all these diverse people to move this forward.
Yeah, I would say that especially like you had mentioned, like when you have multiple designers, like there's always going to be a more senior designer is always going to be more of like a player coach kind of situation. And the more junior designers often fall victim to staying in their own world and not communicating and just kind of doing the thing that we're talking about of just trying to make something pretty. And so it's always this, not really a struggle, but it's like a teaching experience to be able to help them understand that what they're putting together needs to be tied to all those business goals and make sure they don't just fall in love with a design, that a design is also going to be a combination of all the stuff that's come before it.
Exactly. I think that's, yeah, you're saying a coach. I think that's so true. Like young designers, especially, they're creating beautiful things. So they fall in love with their design. So I think that's really on point, Andrew. And, they have to kind of hone their skills. So it's more production work, maybe, if they're refining or building, viewports or pages to help out the more senior person. So it is production, but they learn their craft. I think it's really important for those junior people to really pay their dues in that way. And I think we all have. So, and that's how you learn. You learn from others. You learn from, being on that team and watching others and what they do and their knowledge. And I think it's super important. Yeah.
It definitely is. I think the whole thing is a team sport, within design, but also,
Yeah.
all the different teams that are working on it. And I think in addition to the misconception that designers just create pretty things is that they then just hand these pretty things off to developers. How does it actually work, or how should it work when you guys are coordinating with and collaborating with the development team?
Yeah, there's that whole period of design handoff, and that term I think is not great because there shouldn't be necessarily like a handoff. It's like that's more like a waterfall type of workflow where you're just throwing the designs over the wall to them. But my preference is to have engineers and developers to be involved as early as possible, like even in the ideation phase, because they're the experts on knowing like more of what is feasible in the context that they're currently in. And also like they are the ones that can tell you if something is scalable. So effective communication is going to prevent major issues down the line.
Totally agree. I mean, I think some of, our best team meetings are I'll learn something new that I didn't know from the dev team. And I'll be like, what about this idea? And they'll say, not so great because of this, this, and that. And, then we have to build it 7 times or whatever it is they're saying. And then I learned something like, right. So I feel like it's invaluable, that connection early in the process to run your ideas by them. And then they may have ideas for you that are, mind-blowingly amazing. And you're just like, oh my God, I never thought of that. So again, it's like the melding of the minds and the building on each other's kind of thoughts, ideas, and skill sets. It's so critical and it's fun. I feel like it's fun.
One of the many constraints that, we deal with is that sometimes things have to happen in parallel. So in an ideal world, it's not a handoff, but there is a design process. And then you start a more collaborative relationship with the development team. there are times where, some of this has to happen more in parallel. What are the main risks or concerns that surface, and how do you try and address them when you're forced to do more of this design process and development process at the same time?
Yeah, I would say that the one of the major risks is making sure that we understand what a user actually wants or needs. If we're jumping into development too early, it's can be tricky to back out from that design or that development process. And so there's a risk of duplication of work. And yeah, I would say that
It's not ideal.
yeah,
It's
it's not
not
ideal.
ideal. It's not ideal, but so many times, clients have deadlines or they're just like, can you build it in like 5 minutes? So they're really rushing into a solution. And I think, as Andrew said, if you're parallel pathing, you've got dev going, they're already starting to code, you're trying to find out what the business problem is or user needs. And then you end up in a place where, yeah, maybe dev has built something already and you're like, wait a minute, this is the wrong solution. That's the risk. If you very carefully define what's possible with the least amount of risk, can they start setting up like some sort of environment, whatever it is, I'm making it up, but can we start doing these activities over here? And it's like slightly staggering. So maybe that's like a slightly better approach than parallel. It does happen, but there is risk and there may be rework, as Andrew said. There are ways to try to make it as efficient as possible. And I think it really depends on the situation, the client, like all of that, the budget. They have endless budget, then maybe they don't mind that you're redoing stuff. But that hardly happens.
Yeah, I'm curious. And I know it's hard to answer this in the abstract, but it really does seem that balancing requirements and constraints is a linchpin to your success, right? You guys are strategic problem solvers. If we had to identify another key responsibility of what you're doing as part of this project, you mentioned you don't have the budget you want most of the time. You can never do enough interviews, research, analysis. Like you're time boxing your efforts. The technical constraints, what the team can and can't do, the technology, the brand guidelines. You know, how do you make that work? Like, what are and again, I'm sure it's situational, but like, are there like key things that you're thinking about, or is it all really just driven by, okay, in this client, in this instance, at this time, like, here's how we're going to make the most of what we have.
Yeah, for me, I think that a designer's job is to be an advocate for the end user. And no matter what process is happening or what budget you have, it's like you'd focus on what that end user is actually wanting and needing. And every action that you're doing is trying to move the goal line towards that. And so, yeah, I think as long as you're helping others keep the user in mind as you're going through the process, you're going to end up with a better user experience. But hopefully, if there's not budget for it, you're being like more efficient as you're moving through it.
Yeah. I think if we were in the business of fine art, we would not be used to constraints, but we're actually in the business of design and solving problems. So I feel like we've been trained to understand that we can't do everything we want. And I think that that's just the reality of how we work. And when we come up with great solutions, that's when it's exciting because suddenly you have something that really works, looks great, obviously, and solves problems and fulfills user needs. And it's almost like, yeah, it's almost like a game, like this, mystery of like trying to find, you have this, but you don't have that. You can't do this, but you can do that, So it's actually very interesting and there's never a dull moment. I feel like it's always fun, always interesting.
How do you guys know that you're being successful? right? How do you know that you're not introducing subtle problems or glaring problems? How do you know that you're making end users happy? How do you know that you're meeting your stakeholders' goals? And how do you do that on a budget with all of these constraints? How does that process work?
You want me to
Pilar,
take a stab at it? Okay. Um, I think that, there are best practices out there. There are things that we're constantly educating ourselves on, how user interactions evolve, on design best practices, on design thinking. And so we really leverage those, and those are proven things that work out in the world. And so we leverage those along with really understanding the business problem. And we use analytics. We look at baseline usability testing, and then compare a test after the fact, like usability test at the end after we've redesigned. We create prototypes and get those tested. And we can show over time, like, that things have improved, or, there's more interaction. The form was filled out. They've gotten more leads. They were able to complete more transactions. So I think that it's really, that knowledge, that expertise, following the best practices out there, and then making sure we have the business goals in mind, top of mind at all times. Of course, the users, but we also are working for a client. So we have to really be realistic about that too, that they're hiring us for a reason, to make their business better.
Yeah, hopefully we have agreed upon a certain metric before the project even starts,
Yeah.
and make sure that kind of interwoven in the process that we're keeping that metric in mind, and have a way to measure the impact in whatever it might be. Like, it's nice to have like the hard analytics, but sometimes you don't have that, and but you do need to get some, at least qualitative feedback from customers, so that, I don't know, I often think of a launch as the beginning of learning about a product or a service or a site, and it's not the end of design. We don't always get
Right.
to do another iteration, but when you can do another iteration, like, that second iteration is even closer to what the design should be.
Yeah.
Organizations face a lot of constraints, difficult challenges with respect to how they allocate their budget. Be honest, how often do clients prioritize and do the validation process after initial delivery?
It doesn't happen often, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know that those clients that do have that additional step are more successful in their business, because you are like opening your ear to what this customer is wanting. And the more you're open to it, the more you can provide them with what they're wanting or needing.
Yeah. Well, do you think
Exactly.
it's just difficult, like budget constraints, and they're forced to make impossible decisions? Do you think that, is not understanding the importance or something they intend to come back to? Any insight or, as to why it's not prioritized enough?
I think it's the budget's constraints. There may not be an understanding of the importance of, validation testing, or usability testing after the fact. And I think one thing, clients sometimes don't think of evolution. Like, as Andrew said, if you get a second chance, or you learn something after you launch, and then you want to continuously improve or evolve whatever you're building, they should clients should definitely consider, thinking of that when they are doing their budgets. Is like, it's not a one and done. It's like, you're going to be constantly evolving, because users change, like, how people are interacting with products and services change all the time. Like, so, you built the site three, or even 2 years ago, and things have changed. Look at AI is here, like, right? Like, that's completely, I think OpenAI just launched a new browser, Atlas,
Mhm.
trying to, kill Chrome probably. So things change constantly when you're building digital products and services.
Yeah, this is UI UX design. The things that you do are one of the fundamental pillars of success. And we started by talking about how even subtle problems erode, and impact your business goals. I see another, like a direct parallel with performance and scalability, right? Google and others have proven scientifically that even milliseconds matter. The slower your site is, the worse the user satisfaction is. Direct parallel to what we're talking about. And yet organizations tend to ignore performance until it is a massive and glaring problem. And then they fix it. And they also don't tend to do that ongoing, performance integration into their, build process to avoid it moving forward. And yet they spend a tremendous amount of money on things like advertising to increase conversion rates. And it just, it boggles my mind why you could spend less on advertising, address these fundamental aspects of your site, and see which has a better return on investment financially, and do a tremendous job at increasing your success over time with a very scientific and methodical approach to things versus just more marketing, more advertising on these monthly spends. So my hope is over time that we could push organizations, but I do understand that everybody has to make insanely difficult decisions with respect to where and how they allocate their money. In an ideal world, I'm sure most organizations be like, hell yeah, let's totally do that. Before we wrap up, we talked about so many different things that you do, managing teams, cross-functionally, clients, surveys, user research. What do you think? Like, is there, if you had to say that there's a single factor that drives success in what you do, what would it be? Pilar, I'll start with you.
Single factor that drives success. I think collaboration. I think collaboration with the client, collaboration with the team. If you're not talking to each other, you really aren't talking to the client, don't understand them, don't understand, what's happening with them, their business problems, don't talk to users. I think that's probably the biggest thing that will drive success.
Yeah, I agree. It's about that collaboration and communication, and the real work though is more about building trust, I would say, with the people you work with, and trust with the users that are going to be using this stuff, and with the client. So, it's a key responsibility to be an advocate for the user, but having that trust in all sides is what's going to bring about the best outcomes.
Andrew and Pilar, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. You can check out our past team talks at tag1.com/TTT. That's 3 T's for Tag1 Team Talks. We'd love your feedback, topic suggestions. You can write to us at ttt@tag1.com. That's TAT1.com. If your organization needs help with making things look pretty or building out your site, you can reach out to us at info@tag1. Please don't forget to subscribe. We're available via all of the main podcast distribution channels, as well as YouTube. Again, Andrew, Pilar, thank you so much. Look forward to having you back to talk about more topics like the developer design relationship. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Bye.